Right now, our friend Charles Cooke from National Review is with us. Charles, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming back. It's good talking to you again. And I have to say, I thought your piece today at National Review, Final Thoughts on Sandy Hook, was very well written.
Thank you. It's something I hadn't really written about for a long time for obvious reasons. It's very harrowing, really, to have to go back to it and also to have to read through the report, which was horrible.
It is. The report came out yesterday when I was on the air, and I didn't even attempt to read it when I was on the air because I wanted to give it full time and attention. And as you say, it is horrifying reading, but it is also necessary reading. And you say that the main takeaway is that there is, quote, little that free and open societies can realistically do to prevent great acts of evil. And you know, Charles, there are going to be, and you acknowledge this, there are going to be a lot of people in this country who say, Charles, that's not good enough. That's not a good enough takeaway.
Well, whether it's good enough for them or not, it has the distinct advantage of being the truth. Immediately after Sandy Hook last year, we were told that the obvious solution to this was more gun control. And in most of the cases, especially in Connecticut, gun control that has been largely debunked at the federal level, and indeed by history. The problem here is that when something terrible happens and you have elected officials who respond to being told they must do something, the temptation is to do something, when very often, including in this case, what one should really do is look long and hard at the options and realize that these things are going to happen. Now, it's probably worth saying that there are three probably harsh things we need to accept at the outset. None of them are very nice, but I'm afraid that's the nature of this beast. The first one is that guns are designed to fire projectiles that kill and maim people. Now, yes, they have use for hunting, but they're useful for precisely the same reason, is that they can do damage to animals. So yes, we are talking about deadly weapons. The second one is that bad things do happen in societies that aren't completely locked down, and they happen in societies that are completely locked down. But you could, if you wanted to institute some sort of tyranny, probably reduce the number of bad things like this that happen. That is true. And the third thing is that when you have somebody who has a lethal weapon, whether it's a knife or a gun or a machine gun or a bomb, they're always going to have an advantage over the people who don't. And as I said in my piece, it was equally true at Sandy Hook that had he walked in with just one handgun, he could have killed the same people. They were little children. They were unarmed teachers, as we saw in Texas with the soldiers. And if you read the report, you come out thinking, sadly, there's very little that a law could have done or anyone could have done to see this coming and to stop it.
Now, you say, quote, this is why, knowing that there is not going to be a full-scale gun ban in the country in which such a ban would be constitutionally illegal and practically impossible, the NRA talks about armed guards. Because when you talk about mitigating the possibilities of something like this happening, when you talk about reducing the opportunities for a killer to engage in this type of behavior, what you were talking about inevitably is the ability for that force to be met with equal force.
Yes. So in the aftermath of any shooting like this, the National Rifle Association and gun advocates such as myself are always criticized for saying, well, you know what stops killers is other people with guns or knives or any sort of force, really. The reason they say that is because this report and all such reports note that fairly explicitly. And the reason the reports note that is because it's true. At Columbine, the shooting stopped when the police arrived. They killed themselves, the two shooters. Major Hassan in Texas was stopped by a military policewoman. This guy, the report says, Adam Lanza, shot himself when the police arrived. This is always the way that this goes. Now, the only way to get around the logical conclusion from that, which is, well, you better make sure that the population isn't totally unarmed, isn't rendered sitting ducks, is to say we wish to ban all guns, all of them. get rid of them completely, click our fingers and have them disappear. But we all know that that's not going to happen.
Right.
For a start, it's unconstitutional. But even if it weren't unconstitutional, it's my view, and this isn't a threat, this is just a prediction, that if the U.S. government turned around tomorrow and said, we're going to try and go around the entire country and confiscate all of the guns, I think there would be a war. People are aware that that would be flagrantly illegal and a violation of their liberty. So let's just take that off the table and be realistic about this. The fact is, you read through the report, and there was very little that you could have done to see this coming. He had Asperger's syndrome, which is an autistic spectrum disorder. My mother and my sister both work with people with that. There's no reason to think that those people will be violent. They're not. They're not any more violent than anyone else. Yeah, he was a weirdo in the modern vernacular. He had all sorts of strange traits, but his mother was not at fault, really, for not realizing that he was going to kill people. I don't know why she would have thought that he was. And there's nothing that gun control could have done, because he took a shotgun, an AR-15, and 2 handguns there. He left the shotgun in the car. He took the 2 handguns in and the AR-15. But again, if he hadn't had the AR-15, he'd have had the 2 handguns and the shotgun, and he'd have had a huge advantage over what were innocent little children and unarmed teachers. What can you do?
Well, okay, you quote James Allen Fox, who largely agrees with you, right in the Boston Globe. He says, when tragedy strikes, we invariably look to assign blame and consider all those who may have played a role. And when the perpetrator is dead, we often look for other places to release our collective anger. In this case, Adam Lanza, he writes, is the culprit, not his mother, not video games, not drugs, not bullying, not lax gun laws. While we might look for strategies that will help dispirited and lonely souls among us, there is unfortunately not much that we can do in our own free society to prevent this rare but uniquely frightening crime. Compare that. I don't know if you saw Jonathan Capehart's a piece in the Washington Post or at Post Partisan today, Charles, but he wrote a piece, No Time for Sandy Hook Elementary School Horror, in which he says the most gripping realization to come out of this report was how quickly it all happened. Quoting from the report, from the time the doors of the school were locked at 9:30 a.m. until the time it is believed the shooter killed himself at 9:40 in 3 seconds, fewer than 11 minutes, had elapsed. He then writes about the need for, in his mind, gun control, and he says, quote, it took no time for someone with a gun to take the lives of innocents. It will take an eternity to keep guns out of the hands of those who should not have them, it seems. And I have to say, Charles, when I read that, I was so disappointed in Jonathan Capehart. Because
it's nonsense.
It is. That's exactly right. It is nonsense. It is just flapping of the gums. 11 minutes. You know what I took from that, oh my gosh, it's going to take some time for police to get there. And in those 10, 15, 20 minutes of time, unless you want a massacre to occur, then you have to be able to try to stop it. That's, I mean, and again, I don't think that's cold-hearted. That's just the facts.
Well, it's just an odd reaction. Unless Jonathan Capehart is suggesting my scenario of trying to ban guns completely from the country, to pick up every last one, then, which I imagine he's not, then his view makes absolutely no sense, because, as I say, this is not a very nice thing to contemplate, but this situation would have been identical had he walked into the school with a normal semi-automatic handgun that nobody is suggesting be banned. They weren't acquired illegally. They weren't acquired without background checks. He went into the school with a variety of weapons. And as we saw at the Navy Yard, where Aaron Alexis wrote, he used rather a weapon that is available in France and even in England. Pretty much every gun has been banned. We had our own massacre in England in 2010. 12 people were killed with a .22 rifle. Now, you know, let me tell you why I think the Jonathan Capehart reaction is so popular, and that is that it's much more scary to recognize that you can't solve every problem. You can't prevent every abomination. You can't stop every tragedy, than it is to throw your hands up and say that we live in an imperfect world full of imperfect and flawed people, and that, unfortunately, from time to time, things like this are going to happen. I think it's largely the same instinct that leads to people lying about what happened on 9/11. You know, it's much scarier, actually, to imagine that the United States is vulnerable enough that 19 guys could fly planes into skyscrapers and kill 3,000 people and effectively start 2 wars and wipe billions, if not trillions of dollars out of the economy, than it is that there is some omnipotent government that did this to itself, because if there's an omnipotent government, you can find the guy very easily and, you can remove him from office. Likewise, if you are convinced that this is about guns, and that's all it's about, and if you can fix the guns, then you can believe in the guy who stands up and says, I'm going to spearhead the law. I'm going to fix this. But if you don't believe that, which I don't, it's a much scarier world in some regards, because you just have to accept that bad things are going to happen to good people.
Yeah. No, listen, Charles, I appreciate, again, I appreciate you writing about this. We've only got about 90 seconds left. And after I read your piece and I read James Allen Fox's piece, I remembered the chief of Interpol after the Westgate Mall attack talked to ABC News, and he said, one of the things he said was, ask yourself, if that was Denver, Colorado, if that was Texas, would those guys have been able to spend hours, days shooting people randomly? He said, what I'm saying is it makes police around the world question their views on gun control. It makes citizens question their views on gun control. You have to ask yourself, is an armed citizenry more necessary now than it was in the past with an evolving threat of terrorism? Because, as he says, the other option is to, try to turn everything into a hard target, which is impossible. Listen, Charles, we've got a lot more we could talk about with you. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Happy Thanksgiving to you, and we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Have a good Thanksgiving.